I'm fired up. I am fired up for the version of me 10
Mm.
years ago that believed all this stuff. I have asked this conversation over and over again.
Mm.
Hey, did you come to Christ because a woman stayed in an abusive relationship?
Mm.
I've never heard of someone saying, I grew up in an abusive home and my mom put up with so much stuff. I am just so thankful to Jesus that she did that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It is a lie. It is a lie. It is a lie.
You're listening to the Spiritually Unboxed podcast. I'm your host, Leah Samara, spiritual mentor and authenticity strategist for highly driven female leaders. Each week, we'll dive into deeper conversations, empowering you to live your most authentic and wildly impactful life beyond religious, familial, and societal boxes. Welcome to the deep end. Subscribe so you don't miss a show. I am super excited to welcome the gorgeous Sarah Ramsey on the Spiritually Unboxed podcast. Welcome.
Hello. So happy to be here.
I can't wait for this conversation. We've been chatting about this for a little while. Sarah's story is just so powerful, and your jaw's probably going to be dropping on the floor at some point of all that she's kind of been through and overcome to be where she is and who she is today. So just a little introduction. Sarah is the best-selling author of 2 books, Becoming Toxic Person Proof, Clear the Confusion and Learn to Trust Yourself. And second book is Problem Solved, Simple Habits for Complex Decisions. And she's also host of the podcast Toxic Person Proof, which last week you told me it's done over 300 episodes, which is absolutely insane. Congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you. I just love it so much. It never felt like work.
Yeah.
Oh, just really finding things that are interesting. Every person was interesting, right?
Mm.
And that I think showed, I've taken a little break from the podcast. There's still 300 episodes available, but at the time it was a top, I think 2%, 1% in the world,
Wow.
right? And I just, it being so, you could see that I was actually interested, that they were actually interested in me, and
Yeah.
so it created just really genuine, wonderful conversations that kind of showed through.
And you found your zone. It was like your zone. Are you a verbal processor as well?
Well, I joke. Part of it is my story. I was a preacher's kid, or I am a preacher's kid, right? Southern Baptist preacher's kid. And so where other people were learning not to talk to strangers, my mom was telling me how to talk to strangers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was I remember people, they were like, gosh, you're such a good interviewer. And I was like, what? I'm just talking to people. Like, what are you talking about? There's some aspects of being a preacher's kid that were very difficult. And that was one of the real benefits is like how many conversations with strangers.
Yes.
And I know we talked about the stand-up comedy. I've just recently tried stand-up comedy. And, one of the jokes is like, I've never met a preacher's kid with social anxiety. Once you get scared of the devil, like people don't seem that bad.
You're also thrown in the boat with so many different, like lots of very weird people, lots of old people, like lots of every kind of person that you could ever be.
Hospitals. Yeah. I mean, really and truly, and just kind of that poker face, right? Like, someone could tell you something that you find really different or interesting, or it's a hard thing and you want to be respectful of them. All the funeral stories and nights at the hospital really prepare you for.
Wow. So bizarre, isn't it?
Life's bizarre. Yes. Yeah. And interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I love that. So for those who are listening, just a slight disclaimer, I'm not going to agree with everything that comes out of Sarah's mouth today, or might not, who knows. She probably doesn't agree with everything I believe, and I probably don't agree with everything that the listeners believe. And so it's really good to just honor space for each other's differences. And that's what this podcast is all about, just honoring that space, honoring each other's journey. And just, if you're listening and you disagree with something, I'm sure you could just like breathe through it and be okay. And this is also your trigger warning. We're going to talk about different things today, from religious abuse to significant trauma and those kind of things. So just if you are kind of in a space where you're getting triggered easily, this is your trigger warning. And so, Sarah, how did we connect?
Known each other for years. Yeah. I mean, I think the coaching space is really honestly so small, when you're really connected to coaches. And
Yeah.
I think my love for the coaching industry, there's so many conversations Lee and I have had on the personal sense of like, when we were talking about this, I was like, yeah, do you remember when I went through this? And you were like, actually, I do. Right.
Yes.
That kind of behind the scenes of it's so cool to have trauma informed friends.
Yeah.
Right. And educated people, not, never a situation where you would like use your coaching friends, but it is a different context of can be mutual when you're like, hey, can you look through this piece of advice or take this survey or do this? And I'm like, yeah. And this happened recently, so the coaching space is just such lovely, lovely people. And so I think your listeners would be interested to know we've had this conversation for years and years in different ways, right? In different avenues.
When you emailed me last week, because we were deciding on the title for the podcast, and I emailed Sarah some ideas, and then I get this email back and I'm sitting right here and I was like, and it was like, he got God in the divorce. And I just was like, oh my gosh, that's going to be so good.
I'll say, if you hear becoming toxic person proof, clear the confusion and learn to trust yourself. That was the most difficult part of the journey. And I tell a story about my grandmother to kind of give you some history on where I was coming from. And it's just such a good like anchoring of my childhood. And my son, there was a bully at school that my son was talking to my grandmother about. My grandmother's 90. She's wonderful. She's lovely. I'm not mad at my grandmother, but it's such a good story of like how I ended up where I did. And my son was talking about this bully at school. And my grandmother said, oh, well, if he's being mean to people, he's probably lonely. You should be extra nice to him.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Right? And then he won't be a bully anymore.
Yeah.
And that is the quickest way to sum up the dysfunctional beliefs I had from the Christian faith, from, what that meant of just like, hey, if someone's acting ugly and they're acting badly, Sarah's job is to modify her behavior and be extra nice to them, be better, so that so they will change their bad behavior and be better, be okay.
Yeah.
Right. And there's
powerful, isn't it? I'm sitting here. It's actually landing in my body after you said it. I was like, wow, that has such lifelong implications.
They were so bad too. I mean, just in such trouble, right? And really just that sense of like very black and white thinking of if you're in the church, you're good. If you're out of the church, you're bad. If you read the Bible, even if it's, for show, right? I mean, there was definitely not this sense of like, hey, the people in the Gospels were the Pharisees and they were the church people and they were the villains, right? Those dots were not connected at the time, right? I can connect to them now, but just a very sense of like, oh, okay, these people from this faith are good. And then maybe a tier below them would be like Methodist, right? And then maybe a tier below them would be, right, and just, the people at my church, those are the really good ones. And then the other Baptist churches are like maybe like a tier below, but then the Methodists and just this sense, and it's just heartbreaking now. I mean, it's just there was such grief and confusion for years, right? Because then people acted like people and and I had no sense that the people could like dangerous people, I'll use the term dangerous people could hide in the church and put that cloak of goodness on them, right? And then how quick the church was to defend them, right? I remember one time talking to someone who was not a Christian. They may have been an atheist, right? And I was just so torn up about my decision to get a divorce. And he said, Sarah, do you think people go to the church because husbands treat their wives badly and the women put up with it? Do you really think people are becoming a Christian because of that?
Mm.
But growing up in the system that I did, I don't know if anyone said it out loud, but it was definitely a ticker tape running through my mind.
Yeah.
That if I looked perfect, if other people behaved badly and I just worked harder and harder to modify their bad behavior with my good behavior, then everybody will love Jesus.
Mm.
And it is so egotistical. That is the most egotistical, prideful. And when I finally decided to leave my marriage, which I need to back up and give some more details, but I went with the belief that I was not God.
Mm.
I was like, only God could live through this torture that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Right. And any human, I had to be humble enough to say, this is actually killing me. This is actually me.
What a contrast. You believe that you're so amazing and so good because it's like you can handle it because you're so strong. But hearing that it actually took humility to be able to leave, I can really relate to that, the way that you're describing it.
And humility I want to say it was so rock bottom. I mean, it is so far away from the Sarah that I am now. I remember, to give you some context, I was a pastor's daughter who divorced the youth pastor's brother. Okay. So when I went to my divorce lawyer, he said, oh my gosh, it's like the prince and princess are splitting the kingdom.
Wow.
Okay. This is a very large church, right? And so, just the internal pressure of being that perfect preacher's kid, right? And I say I was perfect, man, I don't know how I could have done better. I mean, it was like, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I followed all the rules. I had read the Bible twice before I graduated high school. I was, didn't go away for college because I wanted to serve my church. I mean, I didn't go on senior trip. In the US, all the seniors go on a trip to drink, and I went to the orphanage instead. I mean, like in Jamaica, and saved the orphans. And I don't say this with any bit of pride. I don't say it I am embarrassed. Embarrassed about that version of it. I want to say very clearly, do not put that on a pedestal. Do not put it on your children. I will not put it on my children. I would have been better off if I had gotten, I told my husband, I said, I know this sounds crazy. I would have had less problems in my life if I had gotten drunk and gang raped compared to what I actually went through.
Yeah.
And I do not say that with any type of, I say that with all the heart that I can. I just say it to say I had 10 years of absolute hell.
Yes. Yeah.
When someone was, and just, I won't get into every detail, but my ex-husband said his role as a Christian husband was to point out my sins, and he didn't have any. Direct quote. And then I would be on my knees begging God to fix the sins in me so I could be the wife that I needed to be. And I'm embarrassed by all of it. I mean, as I say it now, I'm distant enough. I'm not like grieving over it. But wow. But in so many Christian circles, it was like, wow, look how good she is. Look what she's doing. I mean, I'm on my face before God begging to be a better. I mean, I remember saying, God, if you want me to be a slave to him, to save this marriage.
A slave to your husband to save the marriage.
Absolutely. If that was any sense of what I was supposed to do. But at the time, I was grieving so hard. I was trying so hard. I don't say it from a place of humor. I was just dead wrong. I was dead wrong in my strategy.
Yeah.
Of what that meant to like be a good person and be a good Christian. I say it, I was just so misdirected. Right. Yes. In the book, Becoming Toxic Person Proof, the general theme is how to be kind without having your kindness used against you.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Right. Because that was, and it goes back to my grandmother, right? Their bad behavior. Let me extra good if they're being bad so I can save them. I'm using quotes for anyone listening to the podcast, not the video. I'm using quotes on how to save them. I'm just, now I have grace for myself in how many biblical counselors, people, Christians were saying that's what I needed to do, right? It's be so good that I modify his behavior. And the internal dialogue that somehow the world, I mean, all these people were going to become Christians if I stayed in this marriage, and all these people were not going to become Christians if I did not stay in this marriage. I just want to go on record to say how unimportant we all are. If God is not bigger than my marriage, what? It's just, it felt so true for so long, and now it just feels so sad. But I want to say it out loud because I know other people are being told that, or feel like they are experiencing that, and they feel so trapped in it.
It's such a lot of pressure, isn't it? Such a lot of weight. And I think you would have felt it in a compound kind of way because you were, and I've heard this in other women's stories as well who have left church or who have been pastors' wives, and that is you are pedestaled in such a way that there is even more weight than just the good Christian girl. You're like the good pastor's wife or the good pastor's daughter. And so it's even more pressure and even more weight to be that vision of perfection. And there are so many things that add into that. And it's such a lot of pressure for you to be someone that you're not, be this perfect facade image, right?
But I just want to go on record. If anyone has become a Christian because they saw someone go through like a hell of their own choosing to some extent, because I want to say this with as much grace and kindness to say, at the time, I did not feel like it was a hell of my own choosing. I felt like I didn't have any choices, and I felt trapped.
Yeah.
I want to, with every bit of empathy, be very clear in what I'm saying. I am not telling you made the choice to be like, I felt like I was very duped. Like my everything, it was a perfect storm of, thinking everybody in my church was a good, being the pastor's daughter, having this pressure of like having the perfect marriage and the perfect situation. There was a perfect storm. And I did something very stupid in marrying him. And I do not beat myself up for it because everybody else, I don't want to say anybody, but anybody with, dare I say, the programming I had.
Yes.
I would have ended up in this situation. It was not, and I say this to say, Leah, I don't know if you've experienced this. There was a guy I was on the phone with today. He was a very senior level position in tech. We were having conversations, and he asked me for a data point. And I said, well, I think you really want this most recent data point, not the data from the last year, because it's not going to make the most sense. And he goes, I can tell how intelligent you are. And I said, thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to tell you that I'm a pastor's daughter in the Bible Belt of the South. I want you to know that every time a man tells me that I'm intelligent, I anchor it in me. And I believe that I'm intelligent, and I believe what I said to you is intelligent. But I want you to know that I appreciate what you told me, because 20 and under, there are so few men who would have told me, or 30 and under, there are so few men that would have said I was intelligent.
The value's just in so many other different things, isn't it? In that kind of world, it's like you're valued for all these different things as a woman in your womb, and your marriageability and what you look like. And I think too that there's a specific kind of pain when you are that intelligent little girl in that situation, because you are picking up on so much information, but even if you don't know how to kind of process it and what meaning to make out of it, because you are intelligent, you're picking up on it. And so it's kind of validating when you get older and you're like, oh, I was right, or I was picking up on the signals. And it's that intuition part, isn't it, that we were talking about before.
Within my book, clear the confusion and learn to trust yourself, right? And I do want to say, I mean, that technique that I explained, that I still do all these years later. Once I did decide to leave, I was told I was stupid for having ever gotten into it. I was told, I mean, the people who were also duped by this situation. And there was actually a church split when I got divorced, right? I mean, hundreds of people's lives were divorced. This is a conversation about, yes, I got divorced, but there was, it was like World War III. When I have nightmares, it is about the church split. It is not about my marriage or anything like that. I mean, it is about this church split, because it was my greatest fear of not leaving the marriage. I was afraid to leave because this would happen. Oh, it did. Every single piece that, in that situation, it was just awful. I mean, just awful, awful, awful. But I want to say all that out loud, to say, I still anchor when someone tells me I'm intelligent, because at the time I felt so stupid. So stupid for getting duped. And then it is a very convenient truth, quote in quotation marks, people listening to the podcast, and people, oh yeah, I saw this. No, you didn't. If you had known what I was going to go through, you would have held on to my car to not let me drive to my own wedding.
Yeah.
I had someone kind of ask about that marriage, and things are pretty smooth now, and they're pretty smooth now. But as far as the actual marriage, I said, if I had to choose between getting married in that situation again or going to a concentration camp, I would choose the concentration camp.
Wow.
And I'm not minimizing concentration camp, it's very easy to see this is good and this is bad. What was difficult in that situation is I did not trust myself, because the lines between what was good and bad and what was the right thing to do were so blurry.
Yes.
And I was trying so hard. I'm very happily married now. And I feel sorry for him. I say, man, he doesn't have half the life my first husband had, even though it's super healthy and it's like, man, I try like this much with him, and he's thinking this is the greatest ever. And I was selling my soul over the first situation, trying to make him happy,
Wow.
And it's just, he's happy because he had a terrible first marriage too. So we're like both probably like
winning. You feel like you've got the best deal ever.
Both of us do. It's wonderful. But I want to say all that to say, in the subtitle, the title of the book, Clear the Confusion and Learn to Trust Yourself. I just don't know. I'm sure I did. I'm sure my parents did something. I'm sure the church did something, but I don't remember anything. Like, it wasn't ever, here's how to learn to trust your inner Holy Spirit. It was, just ask me my advice. I'm the real smart man. I'll tell you what to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is criminal. It is unethical. It is immoral. It is unkind. I mean, it is abusive in itself.
It's disempowering as well, because it's like you have all the power and I have no power to actually move myself forward and lead myself through things.
It's egotistical, right? If I'm telling my kids, you don't need to learn how to trust your own intuition. If you ever have any concerns, just call me and I'll tell you what to do. That is horrific.
Yeah.
Right? It's horrific. And the rubber really met the road in my own life. I was with several friends in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was driving a car. I guess I had both kids, and I was 4 people in the car, no drugs, no alcohol. It was a bunch of other Christian preachers' kids and preachers' wives and all this other kind of stuff, no substance abuse. And I'm driving the car and I just black out and stop driving while I'm in the middle of an intersection. I start to turn left, and they said I just like shut down. Like I just blacked out from stress, and my hair had been falling out. And that was the point. And I just said, if what God wants is for me to continue on this path, God can't be good. That is the conclusion I came to.
Yes.
And I'm not God. I felt like all these people at my church, wanted me to stay in this situation for the glory of Jesus. It was like, you must think more of me than I am capable of. And anyone is capable of. Anybody who's putting that type of pressure on you, that your body is shutting down, that it's been years years of giving. I'm sure I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't giving 100%. I was giving 500%. I tried this, I tried that, I tried this, I tried that, I tried this. I mean, to the point that I remember thinking, okay, I'm not going to talk anymore. Okay. Everything I say turns into a fight. So I'm just not going to. And I told him, I said, okay, so from now on, we're not going to disagree. I'm just going to tell you in every fight, in every situation, you're right and I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And we can go ahead and just agree to this. I will always be wrong and you will always be right. And so we don't have to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
And but then you won't know I'm right. Like he wanted the struggle of me knowing he was right. He wanted that power. When I just said
it's the win that they're after. Yeah. The feeling of conquering someone. Yeah.
Yes, that's the feeling of conquering someone, right? And so, I mean, it's so sad and so crazy. I mean, to say, and then to go to a biblical counselor and them say, well, if you decide to divorce him, you're personally putting Jesus on the cross. You're personally whipping Jesus with a cat of nine tails. You are responsible for killing Jesus if you decide to move forward in this sin. Actual quote.
So they really saw divorce as a sin no matter what. So under any kind of.
I mean, yeah. And it wasn't, this, the fact that he needed to conquer me wasn't a sin. The fact that I was no longer able, like physically able to put up with it was the sin. What the church does to, and women and men in these situations, I mean, I've heard a lot more female stories, but I certainly know some men who are in just situations. I just think you're so disrespected by these women trying to conquer you, it's just horrific the way, people treat each other, and we give out all access pass in the church. We really truly say, if you make a decision to marry someone when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 32, I don't care. They have the right to treat you however they want for the rest of their lives.
Yes.
We're supposed to put up with it.
If you knew what you were signing on for, you would never sign up for it. If you knew that was what because for me, what was quoted back a lot was till death do us part. Like, this is what you signed up for. And it's like, really? Is this what I signed up for when I was like just turned 22? So I think it's a really bizarre way of pedestaling marriage and trapping people into these situations. And I was listening to a podcast. Do you know, like, the whole I Kiss Dating Goodbye, Joshua Harris and Shannon?
They're divorced now, right?
Yeah. So I've been listening to some podcasts with Shannon because she's written a book, and then I listened to a podcast that was about her book. So she wasn't on the podcast, but they read the book and they were talking about it anyway. And the women was shaming her and saying that, it's such an impact to spreading the gospel that she's written this book and all of that kind of thing, that she's telling her story. I'm like, if that story is true, which personally I can believe it because of what my personal experience has been and listening to stories like yours and other women's. Like, if that story is true, then she is a victim and she needs to be believed. And that is damaging to Jesus. Do you know what I mean? Like, the fact that she's not being believed is damaging because so many people are in these situations, and it's heartbreaking. And if it doesn't break your heart, you've got to question, where is your heart? Are you so aligned to a system and like certain beliefs and theology more than you actually? And this is exactly what Jesus pointed out so much, was you're so keen to follow the rule, but you do not care about the person. You are not operating in love. You're operating in pride and ego and trying to keep the rules and trying to be perfect and trying to work your way to perfection, which is, not going to happen. So it's just, it's sad to me. It breaks my heart. Like, yeah.
Well, I want to go on extreme record to say those people do not believe the Bible. They say they believe the Bible.
Yeah.
Read the Gospels. Who were the villains? The Pharisees. Who were the villains in the Gospels? Who did Jesus away from multiple times. There's multiple accounts of, and what about if someone is a liar and angry and a slanderer, you need to stay away from that person. That has to be, because there's the conversation about picking and choosing Bible verses and that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, those people are too. I want to go on extreme record. Another biblical counselor, we were the first day at counseling, the first 15 minutes of counseling. And, he said, well, here we are. So, it's been 10 years. I finally worked up the courage to show up at this situation. First 15 minutes. And he said, well, we're not going to talk about any of that. You need to forgive. First 15 minutes. And I said, what? Forgive. We're not even clear on the forgiving points I'm supposed to forgive. Okay. And he said, well, the Bible says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. So if you are not willing to forgive the first 15 minutes after 10 years of chaos, there's no clarity on the problems or anything like this. If you're willing to let the sun go down in the anger, then you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with God. I'm not the person you want to get into a biblical debate with. Like, I just want I'm sure that worked for people who don't actually know what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, and then it's like, well, and then here it is in each situation where it's like people trying to manipulate me with the Bible and me saying, that's not really what the Bible says. It's like, well, look how hard she is to live with. Look how content she is. Look, she's so disagreeable.
Yeah.
Find me a list. I want the list of people who stay in abusive marriages and people come to Christ for that. Give me the damn list.
Yes. Yeah.
Give me the list.
So
and
powerful.
I will go on public and say I apologized. But there's this idea of this is so bad for the gospel. And it pisses me off.
Yeah. It's like we have to keep the facade at all costs of and it's the same belief again that we're coming back to, is that people inside the church are good, people outside of the church are bad. So we have to keep this facade happening at all costs, no matter the cost to anybody else. And so it's while we have to keep the image, it's like.
But the only people who think that image is true are people already within the church. To be very clear, it's been a 10-year journey for me. I'm having these conversations. No one outside of the church believes, and excuse my language again, y'all are going to think I'm a terrible person. I'm fired up. I am fired up for the version of me 10 years ago that believed all this stuff. And I want to say those people are full of shit.
Yeah.
There's no G-rated way to say it.
Yeah.
They're full of shit.
Yeah.
And they are abusive and they are controlling. And I have asked this conversation over and over again. Hey, did you come to Christ because a woman stayed in an abusive relationship? I mean, because they act. The church acts as if that is the main way to witness. Yet I've never heard of someone saying, I grew up in an abusive home and my mom put up with so much stuff. I am just so thankful to Jesus that she did that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
They don't say it. It is a lie. It is a lie. It is a lie. And anybody who says that does not read the Bible. They do not believe, because I'm in Southern Baptist world, right? So it's like the Bible's perfect. The Bible is, I don't know your belief about this, and it probably doesn't matter. But I mean, it does matter.
You're right. It doesn't matter for this interview. Yeah.
Right. It is. I'm from the context of people who say scripture is perfect and must be interpreted literally. Great. Then please do so. And I want, there's a Bible verse that says if you've done something wrong against someone, you need to apologize. Leave your work and go apologize immediately. I want the church to give as much emphasis into apologizing as they do forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because forgiveness, I am so good. I am so wonderful. I'm so amazing. I'm going to forgive you.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's from a place of pride too. Apologizing isn't. How many sermons have you heard on apologizing? How many, if there's a situation, in any situation where two Christians or supposed Christians have hurt each other, is there as much emphasis on let's just forgive and erase it and pretend it's not happening because it makes the church look bad? Or is there really, you owe this person an apology. You need to apologize. Everyone to go to church if Christians were the biggest apologizers on the planet. If they were like, I did something wrong, I want to make it up to you. If I did something wrong, if I hurt you, if I offended you, if I was ugly to you, if I was mean to you, let me make it right. Everybody would want to go to church because that would be so counter. That would actually be standing out as a light of the world. I've talked to so many non-Christians and atheists and, about this topic, about this. Guess what, church? The world thinks you're full of shit.
Yeah. It's where the whole hypocrisy thing comes from, isn't it? Because it's like, you say one thing, you expect so much of people, you put heavy weights on people. And there's actually verses in the Bible that say that, like putting these heavy weights on and expectations on people, and you're just not like genuinely loving and caring. I was actually, I don't want to say lucky, but in my situation, multiple years after all of the church garbage went down and all that kind of thing, I did have a couple of people who had, wronged me or turned their back on me and, kind of excommunicated me from circles. They had apologized, and it was so, like, one in particular was wildly impactful. Like, I didn't really know how to take it, because it was just so, like, part of it was hard because it was like hard to be seen in all of that. It just kind of broke through and really upset me, to be honest with you. It was hard to accept that apology. So it's such a bizarre thing. But again, like I'm similar from your space of that, like forgive, or like you must apologize for this thing. And there's no genuine, I think it's for me, I'm not super familiar with Southern Baptist, but for me, that kind of sounds like what I grew up in. It's very simplistic thinking, very black and white thinking, very, oversimplified, and not seeing layers of nuance and manipulation or control and all of these different things. I think back then when, I went through what I went through, we just didn't have the tools or understanding at all within religious circles to be able to deal with any of this. And it was always preached like the Bible is just like black, white, no nuance, none of that. Whereas for me now, and I think I need to do a whole episode on it, it's like the biggest protection that I've had from religious abuse from that point onwards has been understanding scripture, as you've said. Like you've already pointed it out, it's been actually understanding what does it specifically say. And that has been the biggest protection of me, because I can pick up when someone is trying to manipulate me or someone is teaching something wrong. And it's such a safeguard, because I'm like, well, yeah, no, how about no? And so that has been such a safeguard for me, really actually understanding what it says rather than what's been continuously quoted to me over the years, or beliefs that have been instilled and conditioning that's happened. It's been good to just read and be like, oh, actually, Jesus did set boundaries, and he did walk away from people, and he didn't put up with abuse and all those kind of things. There's so much that we could unpack in all of this around the whole abuse sphere and what scripture says, like, because it's just like none of it is ever condoned as okay. And even in the Bible, like the verses that say like I hate divorce or God hates divorce, it's not like God hates divorced people. Like and that's something that I always thought. I always hung my head in shame and was like, I don't think I can go back to a church because I'm divorced now. Like I've got this dirty big mark on me, and I'm like, I'm this wretched person.
Well, it's been very recently that I could walk into a church without having panic attacks. My dad would ask me to come back into his church, and I finally had to have a conversation. I said, I never yell at my children or my family. And when you ask me to come back to church, I am like screaming in the morning, like coffee, to the point that my husband is like, I think I'm going to talk to your dad. He doesn't know what it's costing you.
Yeah.
When he asks you to come every once in a while for a sermon. I got pulled over. I had a friend who I loved and I cared about, and I love her and her family, and her son was getting baptized. And so I drove to the thing and I got pulled over. I've thrown up in the parking lot, and it's kind of this situation. If I had a traumatic experience in a shopping mall and someone said, well, why don't you go to shopping malls? And I'll say, well, I saw a fight or I saw someone get shot and I don't go to shopping malls anymore. People would say, okay, I understand. And when I went through something I mean, it was just so bad. Like, it was bad for years and years and years and years and years. And all these people who I thought loved me, I found out did not, right? And turned against me and said horrible things about me. I found a Twitter account at one point when I was dating Ben that they had set up to live tweet. They set up my dad as an Asian like man, and they were live tweeting his sermons. And then like saying ugly things about his sermons, and they were talking about following me and Ben on dates. I mean, it's just horrific.
Gosh, yeah.
People, I'm quite certain that person was connected to my student pastor. I'm pretty sure I know who it was, but these are people the person I think it was, I remember when he was marrying his wife, I said, I loved him for a long time. I want you to be good to him. He had a really hard childhood. And I remember at his wedding, I know someone else who turned their back on me, and I slept she had twins, and I slept in the bed with her and fed her twins while her husband was down. I woke up in the middle of the night and fed her children. And then later on, she would act like she didn't know who I was at a grocery store.
Yeah.
And I have had these people come back and apologize. And when they felt like God hates divorce and they could not be a part of me, I felt like they were at least trying to align with their belief system. And I remember working to have grace in my head towards them. And, all these years later, when I've seen their life split and, as it all played out, and it's like, quite obviously I was not lying about the situation. And quite obviously this has played out in the exact same, the way I said it was going to. One of them have come back and apologized. And I just don't think they're Christian. I don't think you could possibly have lived through the last 10 years and really seen inside what's in my life and seen the way it's played out. These are biblical leaders. These are pastors. Ask a non-Christian friend, hey, in this situation, if there's, a woman getting out of a terrible situation and a Christian who, turns their back on her and then later years finds out the things she said were true and then don't apologize, which impedes you more into coming to Christ? Is it the pastor who doesn't apologize, thinks he knows everything, or is it the woman who got out of the situation? Just ask. Just ask. Ask somebody who doesn't go to church to choose between those two. What are they going to say? Because I know what they're going to
say. Yeah. It's again comes back to that, so hell-bent on keeping the rule and not seeing the person. And
I want to say, like, anchor in, when someone apologized, it was so uncomfortable for you, and it would be for me too, probably, because it was so unusual. Church people, and I used to quote it's not so black and white. Oh, church people are bad now and out of church. Of course not. Right. I'm not against church people.
Because that's the exact same thing, isn't it? It's the exact same thing, just in reverse.
Right. But I want to say, what does that say about what we're emphasizing in a church? When a church person came and apologized to you, it was weird.
Yeah. I also think too, from my own story, coming from that, I would call myself religious and having followed the rules. And I was very condemning and very judgmental and very perfectionistic and all those things myself. Then when I actually had my Jesus experience, which I talk about in my story a few episodes ago, it was like I could not walk away from that experience unchanged. Like it was impossible for me to walk away from that experience and go and live life the way I had been. It was just so radically different. Like it just changed something inside of me that it was just, while I'm not perfect, it was just impossible to go away and turn away and continue to behave like that and continue to be in my perfection and my egotism and my pride and judging people. And I think it did take for me, before that was that rock bottom moment, like you described, that rock bottom, like there's nowhere but up from here. You cannot get any worse in life. And I think that humbled me a lot, because it helped me see that it wasn't through all of my trying and working hard and killing myself and whipping myself and trying to become what everyone else wanted me to be, it just wasn't working. I knew I'd tried everything, like similar to what you were saying. I was like, I tried everything. I've adjusted myself, changed myself as much as I physically possibly can. And there just was nowhere to go. I think that was where I had that moment of just like, help. Like, I don't know what else to do. So
that's interesting. I had a conversation with a dear friend who kind of made a minor mistake with her child, and she went through the rattle in her head of like, you know, she's like very typical good church girl, like A plus 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 plus, you know, typical church girl, and a good person too, you know. It, not that those are, I don't mean to like, I don't want to be like I'm bashing church people, or I'm not, because I'm not. I want the world to be a better place in a more understanding and a more gracious and kind way, and for people to really experience freedom, you know. But in her head, she was like going through the rattle. Well, I didn't do this and I should have done this, and you're a bad person for doing this. And I went, oh. And I said, I haven't experienced that in years. What you just went through in your head is no longer in my head. And I hadn't about it, right? It's like a sore throat. You don't think about it unless your throat's sore. It's taken a long time to get here. I wish there was a shortcut, you know?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
We could give the shortcut to other people.
Yes. And I think that's a part of being able to tell your story and share your story now. And for me too, I think I don't want anyone else to ever have to go through what I went through. That's just one of the big drivers for me. I look at, you know, the younger age group, like the 18 to 25-year-olds, like they're the most likely to get in cults as well. And so for me, it's like, oh, just have such a passion for passing on the lessons and hoping to save especially young women and girls just so much pain. And I love that you have Toxic Person Proof, because that's it's legacy work, right? It'll outlive you. It can, you know, as long as someone pays for the podcast hosting, you're good. You can still be around after you're not around.
In the book, somebody from my dad's church, actually, she was at a shelter having a conversation with someone, and they said, oh, this book I read, it was the most helpful one. And she goes, oh, I know that girl. You know, it's so funny, you know, it's so awesome. Sweet. But I do want to say, if there are any women our age, I definitely, I want to help the 18 to 25-year-olds too. And Leah, you've probably seen this. You're not doing this, but I want to say out loud, like, I see women, oh, I need to help them, rather than lead them by example. And I know, Leah, you are leading by example, so I'm not, you know, calling this out for you, obviously, right? You know, but I see this and it's like, oh, how do I help my daughter? She's 19. I was like, what are you doing?
Yes. Yeah.
Nothing. Well, I don't want to hear about your daughter.
Yeah.
Do not put the burden on your daughter or niece, or, you know, walk the walk, people, right?
Yes.
You know,
the modeling.
The only option is modeling better behavior.
Yeah.
The option is modeling better behavior.
And it's the easiest way to learn as well. Like, I've had clients say, you know, I love your classes, I love your trainings, and I watch them. But the best part is that I get to watch you. I get to see how you address things. I get to watch you model how to have a healthier life. And it's like, that's what's most powerful, because it kind of gives you permission. You're like, oh, you see that. You're like, oh, I can set that boundary. I can use my voice in that way, or I can say no to that thing. When we're trying to fix ourselves through other people is what that is, isn't it? It's like trying to rescue our inner child by rescuing other people. And it's that same thing of like, if I adjust myself and I make that man, I fix that unhealthy man, then I'll be the dream wife. Like, yeah, it's just it's the codependence thing that just seeps in. So toxic.
Absolutely. And so celebrated in motherhood. I actually had a woman yesterday tell me her greatest dream would be for her children to live in her basement and never leave her. You're not embarrassed to say you're saying this in front of everyone, as if you know how like sad it is for your children and how much your children will hate you. Like, I want to say very clearly, your children will hate you for that. Like, they will hate you. Everything that you're wanting is it's like everything will hate you for. And it is, I went back and looked at one of the things I talked to Ben about recently. He did not grow up understanding the Bible at all. And I said, do you know how few stories are in the Bible about being a good mother and good wife? Like when you think about that big old Bible, it may be mentioned, even the Proverbs 31 woman, it's all about her working and making money.
Yeah. And getting up at like 2 a.m.
So it's like her children arise and call her blessed. They're not talking about homeschooling. They're not talking about even the things I'm just saying what it says. Like, I love emotionally regulating with my kids. I love helping them. I love helping in these ways, right? When it says the best woman, it's not about her being a mother or a wife. It's about her making money and earning things. Find me a sermon on that.
Yep.
Find me a sermon that said, and I'm going to be very silly here. Find me a sermon that says making money is more important than being there for every kid's sporting event.
Yeah. Woo, she's entered dangerous territory. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, but it is just really interesting what the global church really wants to emphasize and like stick in the box.
Yes.
And it's like, you're good if you do this and you're bad if you do this. And it took me years of not being able to read the Bible to go back into it and say, that's not what it says at all. Right? The Pharisees, the church people are the villains. That's just
like the religious church people. It's like I think there's been a huge shift for me personally, because so I go to church now. I go to a different kind of church than what I was brought up in. And it's absolutely, I've had some very interesting conversations there, because for them, the way that they've been raised and the way that so there's women preachers and all that kind of thing. And it's very mind-blowing to them when I talk about the way that I was raised and the things that I've been through and the beliefs and conditioning and the religious conditioning that I've had, because they just don't get it. Like, it's just not a thing. Women preachers, for example, it's just a non-event. It's just so much not a thing that it just never ever gets talked about because it's not a thing. And so it's bizarre for them to just encounter these radically different mindsets. And so for me, it's been interesting to see just the scope and how broad the label of Christianity goes as well. And then the different denominations, you've picked up on that already, and just how wildly different people believe. And I think for me, it has been challenging to find an environment where I haven't found it still having those religious attitudes and still having those religious mindsets. And the reason I am where I am is because they genuinely do love people, and they genuinely do show grace, and there is genuine humility. And I'm not saying it's a big church, right? So I have spotted the toxic people already, as you do. I have pinpointed them all because I can just pick up on the warning signs now. And they're people that I will intentionally avoid. But because it's such a big church, it's kind of hard to never run into a toxic person. But for the majority, it's been such a radically different experience, and one where I still find myself in my old patterns of I've got to try harder, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to serve, I've got to do this. And I just don't. And I listen to God, and God's like, no, get back in your own lane, stop it. And it's so good, because it's just stopped me from bringing some old patterns into these new kind of environments. And it's been a lot of learning, a lot of undoing of just a whole lot of weird conditioning that seems weirder by the day. The more I get out of it, the more weird it feels. And
well, I had a friend post that she was very, strict religious upbringing, we'll say it that way, to kind of encompass all of it, but she was looking back, and it was interesting. She made a point that her evangelical background now told her that, well, now I need to tell people about my new right way. And I was like, oh, she is shining a light on me, and it is well, now I need to tell people about my new right way. What would it be like to even the freedom of I'll let God handle that. And I'm trying, I'm leaning into this, God has to be more important than me.
Mm.
And he has to be more powerful than me. And for that to be the case, I am not that important. And I say that not from just in that space of like, I have to have grace with my imperfections. I just, there's what would Jesus do? If you're holding me and Jesus to the same standard,
Mm.
wow,
Mm.
that's a fail. And if anyone's holding themselves to the same standard as Jesus, I hope the conversation is all about how far away they are rather than how similar they are, and those are the people I will trust, right?
Yes.
And anyone's like, oh man, I have just got this together, right?
It's the compassion piece. It's the self-compassion piece that I think you picked up on really beautifully before. It was like, how do you have ownership for a decision to marry someone that you regret, right? So how do you take, number one, ownership for that decision, because it is a decision you made, it's a decision that I made, but also have compassion for the version of yourself that made that decision. Because as you were saying, how could, it was kind of inevitable with the conditioning that you had, the environments that you were in, the advice that you were given. Like, really, what other option as a young woman would you really have had? And I think it's really such a powerful thing to, and that's again stepping out of that religious mindset of like, I have to hold this facade and this perfection. It's like, no, I can take ownership at the same time as I have compassion for myself. So I don't need to pretend to be a good person. I don't need to pretend to be perfect. I don't need to kill myself to try to attain that standard. And I can take ownership and responsibility and change my decisions moving forward. So I think it's a really healthy place to get to. I don't know if it feels healthy to you, but it's like, when you were saying
feels
that, I
a
was like,
lot better,
yeah.
right? It feels a lot better. And I think the flip I made in my head is of now I think, hate to even say the word good person, but I changed in my head what it meant to be a good person, right? So it was this. And now I have a dear friend. I have a lot of dear friends on the far left and the far right. Like we're talking extreme like friends. And one of the people on the far left was asking me about being judgmental or what it meant to be non-judgmental. And I said, when I was swung out of the strict religious background, it was easy to be really judgmental about the strict religious background.
Yeah. It's the pendulum, right?
Pendulum. And I no way saying I'm perfect. I am not. And if a woman decides to wear a skirt and cover her head and submit to her husband, my goal is to be as non-judgmental about that, or non-judgmental about someone who, is what I would consider judgmental, and I want to be at a place where, I'm as compassionate about that.
Yeah.
Even though I hate it. Even though I think it causes a lot of damage and a lot of hurt. Right. And I'm not there because you heard me like, that's not what the Bible says. I'm not there. Right. Go back and rewind. I'm not there. Right.
Yeah.
But that's the goal, right? And it's really hard because then you switch into this like, okay, I'm not judgmental. Can I be as not judgmental about the female who's really been through some terrible circumstances I am about the male who's inflicting those terrible circumstances?
Yeah.
I'm not there.
Yeah.
I'm not there.
Yeah.
I'm way.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's all, and I'm not saying not hold people accountable for their behavior. Obviously, I am that. It is a spectrum, and depending where you are. But if I may, in the book, Becoming Toxic Person Proof, it definitely talks about blind beliefs like forgiveness and some of these things like blind spots that when I interviewed people, what their beliefs were that were holding them back. It takes two to tango, some of these situations.
I got told that a lot.
Oh, I'm sure. It's something called smart girl syndrome, which is I haven't met a problem I haven't been able to figure out yet. I'll figure this out too.
Yeah. So if you were to isolate, what would you say have been the biggest turnoffs about God, Jesus, church for you?
Oh gosh.
Like what would be like the top three?
my personal thing, and I will say very, very like today, and this is something I would like to get past. But today, if I had to say it, what my biggest issue is.
Wow. So I hope you enjoyed the first part of the 2-part series with Sarah and my interview with her. I left you on a cliffhanger intentionally because I feel like part 1 is amazing, and she's telling a story and a lead up to all of these amazing stuff that's going to happen in part 2. And it would be such a shame for you to miss part 2. So make sure you go and you watch that, or you hit follow or subscribe or whatever platform you're on, so that you don't miss the second part as soon as it drops. It's so worth listening to. Very encouraging, very high level leadership conversation. And I'm so excited that I got to host it. Thanks for joining this expansive session. Subscribe or follow so you don't miss a show. And to help us share this message further, take a quick second to leave the Spiritually Unboxed podcast a rating and review. In iTunes, just click the reviews tab, and in Spotify, go to the main podcast page and tap the 3 horizontal lines under the podcast cover image. Now go out into the world and be the incredible masterpiece that you are. I'll see you in the next episode.